Hello and welcome to day 2 of the Digital Pattern Drafting Challenge. If you're watching the replay or if you're watching live, please make sure to drop a hello and where you're watching from. I always love to see where in the world we are all joining in from. Today we're going to be going over some measurements, some common terms, some of these tools in Illustrator to really kind of do a deep dive and start understanding all those different things. If you have any questions from yesterday or things that have come up today, please make sure to drop them in the chat so that we can help you get moving in your digital pattern drafting journey. And hi, I am Christina. I love to help people learn. I love to help sewing enthusiasts learn how to digitally draft sewing patterns so that they can create their own pieces of wearable art. I absolutely love taking that two-dimensional picture, whether it be an actual picture or a rendering, and then recreating it in first a pattern and then recreating it for myself, sewing it, or for someone else. I love that process from beginning to end, and with all the challenges that come up, it's one of those things that just really gets me excited. Hello, we have Miami fashion stylist coming in from Miami. Hello and welcome. The other thing I guess I should have mentioned last night is I am streaming with StreamYard. So if you want us to see who you are, you'll just have to give StreamYard permission to post your name to me. If not, it'll just come in kind of as a random name or sometimes just Facebook user. It is totally up to you, but I would love to be able to see who I'm talking to. That way we can better reference what's going on. So we're going to talk first kind of about some of the common terms that come along with pattern drafting. So you've probably heard of pattern drafting or sloper, basic pattern set, draping, flat patterning, probably a French curve, L square. There's probably all these different types of terms that you've kind of maybe heard a little bit about, but maybe don't know a ton about. So we're going to just start with a sloper. A sloper is a basic fitting garment that has very little style lines and takes as little seam lines and style lines and darts to really fit the body. It is that pattern that is more of a sheath for your body. You can often find it as a nice dress. You can find that it could also be a sloper because it has just a simple dart. It has a waist. It has a waist seam, and it has basic sleeves with no huge gathers or anything. So there are tons of times when people start with a basic pattern from a sewing store that's very simple and start as a sloper. There are other times when you actually flat pattern a sloper. That's where you actually take a whole bunch of different measurements, and through a very specific set of instructions, you actually draft your sloper for yourself. It is a time-consuming process, and there is sometimes a little bit of math that you have to do with it. Like you'll have to go down a quarter of this line and draft it at, so this certain amount off of your body measurement, or you'll have to split this line in half. Luckily, in this day and age, we all have calculators in our pockets, and I absolutely love that. I always have my calculator out on my phone or my calculator up on my computer. I also have a little chart that is it like going to let you see it? Yeah. So I also have this little chart that it comes in the key commands and useful charts. I just printed it out and laminated it so that I can have it posted right next to my computer, and that has all the fractions to decimals for me. I've definitely learned a lot of them, but sometimes when you're needing it to be 15/16, I never remember nor expect myself to remember what the decimal point is for 15/16. It is 0.9375. There's times I might remember that one or twice if I'm using that a lot, but oftentimes I have to continually relook that up. So I always find that is really handy. Another thing that we want to talk about is the difference between draping and flat patterning, because they are two different processes that can actually get you to the same result in most instances. So flat patterning, like we just said, is you take a whole bunch of measurements and you follow a very specific set of instructions and you actually pattern out your sloper. You can actually drape out your sloper as well. If you have a form, I have my little tiny half scale right here. You can pad her out to fit you exactly if you want, or if you're close enough in size, you don't need to drape, you don't need to pad her out at all. And then what you would do is you would take a piece of fabric, often muslin or some sort of cotton, and start draping. So when you are very symmetrical, like a lot of people are, you can drape on the half. However, I do know that there are people who are not symmetrical and they do have to drape the full pattern from side to side just because of how their body works. But if you're just draping a half, you always start with a center line down that front for your fabric, and you drape around this body, pinning out the excess fabric and pinning in your lines, and then marking your fabric up with a pen or pencil or chalk. There's a lot of different things you could use. And then that would then create your pattern instead of having to measure everything out. So those are the two different ways you can definitely do it. In Illustrator specifically, it is all flat patterning. However, there are programs where you can kind of do a little bit of draping and actually have it mimic it. We're not going to be going into that tonight, but that is something that is definitely an up and coming thing. And I'm super, super excited to really be getting that experience in and start learning those ones. So Michelle King is also joining us here. She is in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Welcome. I'm so excited you made it here. I think that's what, yeah, I'm here from the Blue Ridge Mountains. So welcome. Next, we're going to be talking about books. So often when you're flat patterning, you do need to work off of a book. When you're draping, you can kind of just go by the eye and by the feel. But when you're flat patterning, I highly, highly recommend getting a book. They are textbooks, so they are going to be a little pricey. But the really great thing is you can often find amazing resources at your local library. I have gone to our local library numerous times actually, and have found many, many different amazing books that once I kind of looked through, it's like, oh, I really like this one. I like how they explain stuff. I'm going to buy one for myself. Or I look at it, it's like, I don't like how this is laid out. I don't like how they write it. It's a confusing book, and I know I don't want to get it. But the book that I use all the time, oh, can we get it to focus? There we go, is Pattern Making for Fashion Design by Helen Joseph Armstrong. I absolutely love this book. And if you buy it, I do always recommend buying it spiral bound and not the other one. I have it both. And let me tell you, my spiral bound book is outlasting the regular bound book by a long shot. The bound book is cracking and the pages are falling out, and the spiral bound is just plugging along like nobody else's business, and it's happy. So there are lots and lots of different books. That's just the one that I love. That's one I use. I understand it. It makes sense to me. But there are lots and lots of really great books out there. And if you have any books in flat patterning, you don't have to go out and buy this book. You can make many, many books work. I don't think I have it right here. I think it's over in my bookshelf. But I got a book at a thrift store once that was a flat patterning book from like the 50s. Great information, still has all the same stuff in it. So you don't even need the newest, latest, and greatest to be able to start your patterning journey. And the last thing we're going to talk about before we jump into Illustrator and start playing around with some of those key commands is measurements. You should have gotten a measurement sheet today, and that's just a basic measurement sheet so that you could, if you wanted to, draft a sloper. There's numbers next to it. It correlates to in my course, I teach people how to actually draft their own sloper in Adobe Illustrator, and all those numbers correlates with steps within that course. But it's just a great basic sheet that has a lot of information on it. But for tomorrow, the one measurement that you're going to need is your waist measurement. Luckily, circle skirts are very easy for measurements. Well, I guess you need two measurements. You need your waist measurement and you need your length of the skirt that you want measurement. So, but they're very easy because there is so few of measurements that you need. You can actually create something really cool pretty quickly. So one thing that I want to talk about is when you are measuring, let's bring this girl over center just a little bit. You want to make sure that you're staying parallel to the ground when you're measuring all the way around. So if you have her sideways, you want to make sure that you're not twisting your like that as you, I'm not sure you can see, I'm not sure how great you can see that. That still looks pretty flat and even, but you want to make sure that it's perfectly parallel with the floor and not doing any weird angles. If you get into doing those weird angles, that's when your measurements are going to be off and it'll cause you some other problems that you can get fixed within fittings, but it still will cause the problems, and it's never fun to have that when you're working or anything like that. The other thing that I always recommend to do is have somebody else take your measurements. There are some that you can very easily take your own measurements, and that, it's your waist, your bust, and everything, but there's always that, there's a little bit of a slip. Whereas if you're just standing there nice and tall and having somebody else take your measurements in a natural fit, it's going to be a better, in general, overall output of your measurements than if you're actually having if you're trying to do it all yourself. There are plenty of people who will show you how to do it all by yourself and everything, and I think that's a fine way to do it for them, but I never recommend that. I always want somebody else to take my measurements, to double check my measurements, because I have worked with too many measurements that were sent to me in my life that were taken by the person themselves, and they were wrong. And then I drafted this beautiful thing for them. We put it on their body and it did not fit at all. So there was a lot more of alterations that had to happen, or there was a lot more of issues that came up when they're like, oh yeah, I took all my own measurements, here you go. It's like, oh, cool, good to know. But that is something that I always highly recommend, is just get a buddy, get a friend, and take your measurements, and it will come out much better, and it'll cause you less headache in the long run. Let me scoot her back over, and we're going to bring up Illustrator and get this party started in Illustrator and get moving into these key commands and useful, well, just the key commands. The little free thing is the key commands and useful charts, which we'll be going over some of those things in that chart. So I have my half scale right here, and I love working in half scale. As you can see, I have a nice cute little dress, but I love sometimes when I'm not sure if I want to go a certain way in a pattern, or I want to test out a new pattern, or I just want to kind of see what it would look like. I love being able to draft quickly in half scale, use a quarter of the fabric that would actually be needed to create the whole thing, and then see if I would even like it, or see if it would fit what I want to do. Then there are ways you can then scale up from there. I always just then redraft in my own sloper, because my half scale does not directly relate to, or this half scale right here does not directly relate to my fitted sloper on me. But once you do all the steps and processes once for the half scale, you can get stuff moving forward quickly with that. So we're just going to kind of go down the list a little bit of our different tools. So yesterday we talked about the direct select and the select, and they're kind of two operations of the same coin. So the direct select key command is A. So if you want to click A, there we go. If you want to click A and then you click your thing, you click your pattern, you can actually see that the entire pattern is now highlighted, but then you can also see that each anchor point is highlighted. So I always remember that key command because anchor point A, it's an easier one for me to remember. And that means you can change the anchor points. So what I'm going to do is I am actually first going to copy this over so that I still have my original copy. I always love keeping my original copy in case I always want to go back to that. And then I also want to then just always make sure I get started with a fresh copy thing. How do you get to that screen? So yesterday when you set up your artboard, you can open up a new document and make it the size, whatever you like to do. I did 72 by 72 yesterday. Some people like to do the size of their fabric and everything. But what you would want to do is you want to go up to this little button up here, the little square with like the one square within it to switch your workspaces. And then you want to pick the workspace that you created yesterday. So say when I came into Illustrator, it came in on the painting workspace. So it changed quite a bit. There's a lot more tools around. It's a little bit more cluttered. So I want to go back up to this little square with the little square in it. And then I'm going to go down to my pattern drafting September 23, and then it changes everything back to that. If you are interested in this half scale, I can definitely also drop the link down below if you're interested in buying the half scale so that you can start playing along and manipulating it as well. So if we hit A and reselect our pattern, you can see that the whole pattern is highlighted as well as the anchor points. And that's when you can actually go in and start clicking on those anchor points and manipulating just the anchor points. And you can do that for any of them, or you can do that for a line as well. Control Z is your friend, and it, I use it all the time. I love it. So the other side of that coin is the select all, which is V. And if you click V, you can now see the entire pattern is highlighted, and you can see it because there's a full square around it. You know that if you grab it, you're going to be moving the entire thing. Now my pattern's not grouped. That's why the bust point and the arm's eye notch did not move with it, but you can move the entire thing. So if I wanted to move it all, you'd have to make sure that you highlighted each and every part of it to go around. Now you also might notice that I am actually grabbing the very edge of my pattern. I'm not grabbing here in the middle, because when I grab in the middle, there's nothing actually there. And that's because the center of my pattern is actually not filled in at all. And you can tell that by over here on the right-hand side, there is a paint square, and it has a white with a red line through it, means that it is empty. If I wanted to add in so that I could grab my pattern wherever I wanted, whoops, actually I have to highlight my pattern first, and then we're going to highlight it white. Now I'm going to actually group those really fast. Now I can grab in the center of my pattern and move it wherever I want on the workspace. This is a personal preference of which way you like to go. When I am flat patterning and drafting, I have lines going every which way on my pattern, and I want to be able to see through all of those lines to be able to reference other lines. So I always like to work with all of my patterns being completely see-through until like the very, very, very end, when I'm actually like finalizing stuff. This just comes down to like a personal preference of what you like to do versus what just comes natural to you. If you want to really just grab in the center of all your patterns, just have them filled in. If you are open to grabbing on those the outside of those patterns, then don't have them filled in. It is a personal preference, and I am going to move it back to see-through because that's what I'm used to. So that was the direct select and the select. The next tool that we're gonna, or the next two tools I guess we're gonna talk about is the rectangle tool and the line tool. So the rectangle tool is key command M. If you click that, you can either drag and drop whatever size rectangle you want, or you can just click and say, I want to do a 3x3 square, and it will draft you a 3x3 square. This is very handy for when you're actually drafting your slopers or drafting anything. You kind of, it's again how you have to think about stuff differently from when you are pattern drafting by hand versus pattern drafting on the computer, because there's certain things that you have to think about of, you're going to draw this line here and then you're going to square out all the way to the side here. Well, you can't, I mean, there are ways to do that, but the fastest and easiest way to do that is to draft the rectangles. So I draft rectangles all the time. And when I'm trying to square off of lines that are not perfectly on the 90-degree, 40-degree areas, I also use squares, because that will make sure that you have that 90-degree, so you have that nice smooth transition from pattern to pattern. The next one is the line tool, which is the backslash. And again, if you just click, you can have it do 20. And then you also can figure out which direction you want it to go. So right now, this angle is going to shoot it straight down at 270 degrees. If I wanted to go straight out to the left, I could change that to 180. And you can see that this center guide has changed to the 180 position. This is something that is super helpful to kind of know. So if you actually do want to draft something that is perfectly parallel, that's really helpful. The other thing that is really handy is you can actually grab and move that little guide anywhere in there. So if you don't know exactly the angle you want to go, but it's like, oh, I want to draft it up in that angle, you can click it there and it will draft right up on that angle. And that's a super kind of helpful, ready way. You're going to use that a lot if you are drafting a sloper or if you're patterning it all and you're wanting to draft a line and rotate it around. That's just something you'll want to kind of get used to and know what to do. And you can also just click and drag a line. It does tell you how long it is, but if you want something very specific, I always say do a single click and type in your 5.75 line, and there you have it. That's always going to be the much more precise way of doing stuff, instead of trying to pull out a line until it goes to 0.75. Oh, I got 4.76. Yeah, so I always go just click it and tell it exactly how long you want to do it, and then it will be super precise. So I'm going to clean up my workspace by hitting V and deleting all that stuff, because those are our lines and rectangles that we don't necessarily need. The next tool that we're going to talk about is the zoom tool and the hand tool. So when I'm wanting to get around on this board, I hit and hold spacebar, and then I can just click and move to wherever I want on this board. That way, if you're trying to do something, like if you're trying to draft a square, you can hit M and then the square will move around the board. You won't move around the board, but you know, you have to still, if you know that you're trying to draft a square around something, you have to be as big as you want it to be, or you have to be able to drag and drop like that. But I am never dragging and dropping that big of an area or that big of a space. And I normally always use the key commands to put the exact width and height of the rectangle that I want. But if you just hit spacebar when you're not doing anything else, you will drag you all the way anywhere you want around your board. Now, I also zoom in and zoom out all the time. So I always hit Control plus plus plus, and it'll zoom you in. It'll just keep going, and then minus minus minus, and it'll take you way, way far out. And it'll go directly to the center of where you're currently at, unless you have something highlighted. If you have something highlighted and you hit plus, it's going to zoom you in to that particular spot. So when you're pattern drafting many different things and you've worked on something in a different area and you're moving to a new area, if you forgot to unclick on that old area and you're like, ooh, I want to zoom in right here, but you're not clicked in on the new area, you're still clicked in on the old area, you're going to all of a sudden shift your entire artboard back to that original area. So it's just something to be aware of, that if I was to move back over here, I'm like, oh, I'm going to play with this sleeve, and I'm going to zoom in, I'm right back to where I originally was last highlighted. So that's just something to note. You can also get the zoom tool on the side here and click in, and it will kind of click in where you want it to go. If you hit Alt, you can click out. You can also drag to the right to go in and drag to the left to go out. Again, I don't find those nearly as precise. They're not my favorite. I always like the plus, 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 minus, minus, minus. Sorry, control plus, 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 and control minus, minus, minus. If you just hit the plus and the minus, that's actually a totally different tool. So, and it won't do what you want to do. The last two tools that we're going to be talking about tonight, we just had a question come in. Is there an undo function? Yes, Control Z is your friend, is the edit undo. So if I grabbed the front this and I pulled this out and I was like, oh, I didn't mean to do that, you can hit Control Z. Or if you do that, you can also come up here to edit, and there's an undo move, and you can undo that move. And that's the fast way to edit undo that function. If you're looking to edit undo like a zoom in or zoom out, there's not really a way to do that, but you can just then zoom back out or zoom back in and make sure you're clicking in the area you want to zoom into. So the last two tools that we're going to be talking about today is the reflecting and the rotating tool. So if I wanted to make an asymmetrical garment for some beautiful reason, because I love asymmetrical stuff, I would first make sure I'm selecting with the V. You want to select all, because if you just select with the direct select, you're only going to be selecting what you highlight. So if you highlight the whole thing, it won't be a problem. If you only highlight part of it, only part of it's going to go and it's going to be a mess. So make sure you're using the full select when you're working with the rotate or the reflect tool. So you can click the reflect tool here, and you can see that this little teal bullseye kind of came up in the middle of the pattern. So it can be reflecting it's going to be reflecting over that center point. But a lot of times you actually don't want to be reflecting over that center point. You want to be reflecting over a line. Or like this, we want to be reflecting over our center line. So then what we're going to do is we're just going to click that anchor point, and it's going to move that reflect point to that line. And then I'm going to click the bottom here. But before I do that, I want to hold Alt and click that other anchor, and then it's going to reflect it for me. And then I have the two pattern pieces. I can now create an asymmetrical garment and have a blast, whatever I'm creating. Now you can also, we're going to edit undo that. You can highlight everything. And if you just wanted the opposite way of this, say you still want to cut it on the fold, you just wanted it flipped around the other way because of how your fabric was going to be when you were projecting it on there or something, all you would have to do is you can right click, arrange or transform, and hit the reflect. And then it's going to ask you, do you want to reflect it horizontally, vertically? Do you want to reflect it at an angle? And then you can just hit OK, or you can hit copy. OK is just going to reflect that single pattern back at you. If you hit copy, it's going to make a duplicate. So you will have two right on top of each other. So you could still make an asymmetrical garment. You would then just have to reline up that center line. Just like so. We're going to edit, undo that, Control Z. What do I mean by the fold? So when you're on it, when you're cutting, often when you're cutting like center shirts, or when you're cutting a t-shirt out, let's go with that, you don't actually have a a stitch line or a seam line directly down the center of your body. It's normally a full pattern that's from edge to edge. So this shirt could, or this pattern I have here, could very much be a pattern. But if I were to cut this out, if I cut it out just as it is and then tried to put it together, if it wasn't on the fold of the fabric, then it would actually, I'd have a seam down that center front. So I would have to have put this line, you'll often see it looking, a marking like this. Ooh, I didn't get that first marking very well. You'll see a marking like this on many different sewing patterns, and that means you actually want to put that pattern on the fold of the fabric so that it unfolds. The other thing you can do is, if you don't want to put it on the fold and you want to be very specific or strategic on the pattern that's on your garment, you can reflect it across that center line and then cut it out not on the fold. So it's really just that garment that you are only pattern drafting half of it, and it's symmetrical over to the other half. I hope that helps and answers that question. If not, please let me know. I'd love to make sure you get that answered. And we also have, do you have to put that line to the top of the center front line? I usually just click on the center of the center front line. Do you have to put that line if you're talking about when you're reflecting over, you don't have to put it up at the center top. That's just habit for me. When I'm reflecting, I like to go to my 2 anchor points because my mouse, it'll click, it'll be that is on your anchor point and an anchor point, and then I know it's reflecting perfectly over that line. You can put it anywhere on that line and reflect it over. So you don't have to go all the way to the top. You can, if I was to, let me restart this. If I was to reflect this over and I just click that line and then click the line again, it reflects over just the same because it's going over that parallel line. Like if I wanted to, I would probably never do this, but if I wanted to reflect it over my side seam, I can also still reflect it over there. It's just the line that I'm going over that it reflects. So, okay, awesome. Yeah, it's just that anchor point gives me a base, because it's also really, really easy to be like, oh, I'm going to reflect this thing and I'm not on that anchor point. And if you see, can I zoom in? It never gets, the little guy, the little bullseye, he never gets very big. But so say I was zoomed out and I was slightly off and I didn't realize I was slightly off, and I was still trying to reflect over that anchor point. Because it wasn't perfectly on that line, it's now slashed and spread almost at that top of there. So it's just something to consider and look at. And again, it comes with practice, because I still sometimes don't exactly get my anchor points, or I reflect something a little bit off of not where I want it to be. And then it's like, oh, let's redo that. And the last tool that we're going to really do a quick dive into is the rotate tool. So I often use this. Awesome. I'm so glad you will use that. I hope that definitely helped. So the rotate tool I often use when I'm trying to kind of give myself either a guideline when I'm flat patterning, and I also use it to straighten out my patterns. So if I was to draft a line, let's actually draft a 6-inch line, sure, at 45 degrees, but we actually want that line, for whatever reason, to be rotated over touching the square. I don't know why it would be touching the square, but we want it to be we want the bottom anchor point here to stay where it is, and we want to have the top anchor point be rotated over to touch the square. Now, if you just try to rotate it by hitting R, you'll see that the little bullseye comes up right in the middle, and it's just going to rotate right over that center point. Not what we want it to do. So if we want to hit rotate, and then we click where we want to rotate it from. So right now we want to click right on that anchor point again, and then we can rotate it so it's just touching the square. That's just a lot of times when you're drafting a line, it says draft a line, this measurement off your body long, and have it touch this line that's coming down from another part. That's very commonly said when you are actually drafting a sloper from even the pattern drafting book from Helen Joseph Armstrong. Totally spaced her name. Love her. But she has a lot of those, like, you're going to draft along this line connecting these points. And that's something that we can't actually physically put a ruler up on our computer to say, I want to start here and end here. So that's the closest thing you can do, is you draft that line and then you rotate it till it hits that line. And that's the same type of thing of putting that ruler down and making it work. The other way that I commonly use my rotate tool is if I'm truing something up and my pattern is not straight up and down anymore because I'm moving it around. It's not straight up and down, but I always like to try to keep them up straight up and down, especially when I'm printing. I like to have that be part of that grain. It's just going up and down, makes it much simpler. If I want to then rotate it so that it's perfectly up and down, I will then draft a rectangle and just go in just a little bit and notch that out till that anchor point's right on that line. And I'm going to use that rectangle as my guide because it was drafted completely up and down. So we're going to use that as our guide. We're going to hit our rotate. Again, it always starts in the middle. So we're going to go back over to our side right here. And we're going to rotate in till we hit that line. And then we're going to get out of there. And we now have our pattern back straight up and down nicely, beautifully on our art board there. Just realized my color was hanging out that entire time. Hopefully it wasn't blocking your guys' view too much. At least it was a very, very small one. So those are some of those tools that you're going to use all the time, just kind of doing a quick deep dive into them. If I went a little bit too fast, I definitely do have a deep dive into a lot of these tools up on YouTube that you can kind of go back into it a lot and kind of rewatch those and check those out. If you have any questions on those tools or anything, definitely drop them in the chat and let me know so that we can get you pattern drafting. Now, your homework for tonight is to just kind of play around with some of these tools. Just try to mess around with them just so you get used to working with them. Even if you're not using the key commands yet, if you're even going over here and saying, I want to draft a rectangle, and there's the rectangle, and then I want to rotate the rectangle, you can, I just want you to be trying to draft in Illustrator a little bit, even if it's 5 or 10 minutes. Because it's just a slightly different way of doing things. It's going to help you move faster so that when you're patterning your circle skirt tomorrow, you'll at least have done some of the stuff and you'll have worked with it and kind of know what you're working with. And if you have any issues and you want to know more, you can definitely ask those questions tomorrow. The other part of your homework is to get your waist measurement done. We want to know your waist measurement, and then we also want to know what length of circle skirt you want. So if you have somebody measure your waist and then measure your waist to your knee, if you want to do a knee skirt, waist to the floor, if you want a full length skirt, it is totally up to you what you want. But those are your 2 homework assignments tonight. Just play around in Illustrator a little bit, try to start getting used to those key commands, and then get your waist and length measurement so that you are ready to draft your circle skirt tomorrow. I am so happy that you joined me tonight. Make sure that you're asking questions. Because the more I'm not actually sure if I said this at the beginning. I know I didn't say this yesterday because my computer restarted on me yesterday and I was totally flustered and totally forgot. But the more you comment and turn in your homework and everything, that's going to put your name in for a drawing and to win a fun little surprise possibility. And we will be letting that run through the weekend. So even if you're catching the replays, you'll still have time. So make sure that you are commenting and asking some questions, saying hello. That way we can actually, you can get your name entered in to win a fun little surprise. So I hope you had a wonderful evening. Let me know if you have any more questions, and I will see you all tomorrow when we draft our circle skirt. Have a wonderful night.